This is the World Organic News for the week ending 16th of July 2018. John Moore reporting. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. We begin this week with the return of an old demon, the hole in the ozone layer. From the blog Activist News Network entitled Ozone Hole Reopening, China Insulating Chemicals Said to be the Source of Rise. Quote, cut-price Chinese home insulation is being blamed for a massive rise in emissions of a gas highly damaging to the Earth's protective ozone layer. The Environmental Investigations Agency found widespread use of CFC-11 in China, even though the chemical was fully banned back in 2010. Scientists have been extremely puzzled by the mysterious rise in emissions, but this report, link in the show notes, suggests the key source is China's home construction industry. Just 2 months ago, researchers published a study showing that the expected decline in the use of CFC-11 after it was completely banned 8 years ago had slowed to a crawl. There were suspicions among researchers that new supplies were being made somewhere in East Asia. End quote. This is a serious matter. The rates of increased skin cancer alone should be raising hell across the global community. But vested interests, everyone needs to trade with China and so on. From further in the post, quote, as China is a signatory of the Montreal Protocol that governs the use of ozone-depleting substances, it should be possible to put trade sanctions in place. However, since the protocol was signed in 1987, this weapon of last resort has never been used and it's not expected in this case. End of quote. We can only hope. To continue with the bad news. Don't worry, it's going to get better later, but to continue with the bad. From the blog Musings of a Young Londoner comes the post, decarbonisation is not enough. Quote, people in Canada are dying because it's too hot. Roads in the UK are melting. It hit almost 32 in Glasgow recently. And spare a thought for those humans who live in perennial warmer climes. In Oman, the lowest recorded temperature during a 24-hour period in June was 42.6. So forgive me if I sound a little alarmist. Average global temperatures have already risen by more than 1 degree C since pre-industrial times. Atmospheric carbon dioxide levels have risen almost 50%, from 250 parts per million to 410 parts per million, the highest they've been in 800,000 years. The rate at which the Antarctic ice is melting has tripled in the last decade. End quote. So that's all good then, nothing to worry about. Obviously this is not good. I've discussed before that decarbonising the air isn't enough, and I'll get to that part of the post soon. We need to recarbonise the soil. We need to do it while there still is soil. In parts of the world where glaciers left, there's plenty of soil, and much in reserve. In other parts, we're looking at desertification. The post cited looks to geoengineering as a solution. I have problems with this path, given how poor we are at identifying or even thinking about unintended consequences as a species. Messing with the climate by adding more chemicals to it or building giant space umbrellas doesn't seem to me to be a viable solution. I recall a Scientific American article way back in the late 1980s where the idea was to place giant solar arrays in space and beam the energy down to a worldwide grid. That did make more sense. It was argued that the system would be sufficient to power the planet, but again, unintended consequences that none of us have thought of. The author does point out there are CO2 sequestration systems that have evolved to work on our problem. We call them plants. Quote, the most efficient method for removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere that exists today is photosynthesis. Plants are in the business of CO2 capture and conversion, and have been long before humans came along and disrupted the natural carbon cycle, and we certainly need their help now. So yes, we can and should plant more trees, adapt farming practices to revive soil health, because healthy soil stores more carbon. And we should give photosynthesis a helping hand where we can. One of the great promises of genetic modification is that we might be able to make photosynthesis even more efficient, thereby reducing atmospheric CO2 and improving agricultural yields. We should temper our hubris on this front though, given that evolution has a 3.4 billion year head start. End quote. So there is a solution under our feet, in front of our eyes and over our heads. Plants. The other solution suggested in the post is DAC, direct atmospheric capture. This involves sucking the CO2 out of the ambient atmosphere rather than chimney stacks. The idea shows some promise, but the storage always raises questions. Who wants large amounts of CO2 stored under the land they're living on? A significant leak would be fatal to all animals. If you're interested in delving more deeply into this, there's a link in the show notes. Technology is the focus of our next post. Land purchased on Oregon coast to support commercial wave energy research from Eclipse. This seems like a reasonable idea. Movement transformed into electricity. Quote, the vision: harness the power of the ocean to generate electricity, but first, companies racing to build commercial wave energy systems need a proving ground upon which to test their creations. Enter Oregon, to be exact, Oregon State University. OSU's state received a $35 million grant in December 2016 from the US Department of Energy's Water Power Technologies Office to create just such a wave site, end quote. The article refers to the many ways moving water can be used for electricity production. The problems of working in salt water are many. Maintenance alone provides many challenges. Add electricity to water and the challenges increase. There's a nice pic in the post, which is, of course, in the show notes. To continue our move towards better news, we have a post from Lettuce entitled Homesteaders, Victory Gardeners and Backyard Farmers Unite. The title alone caught my attention. Now to the post. Quote, all throughout the country, backyard gardeners and producers are growing an abundant supply of vegetables, herbs and fruit. Individuals pour their heart and soul into the soil, the plants and the care they provide to produce the food they eat, often sharing what extra they produce. Imagine if that network of farmers could be brought together to provide high-quality food for the surrounding community they live in. Now imagine if those farmers could be paid for the food they produce and make a supplemental living while doing what they love, end quote. Indeed, this is a vision worth pursuing. Imagine the chemical-sucking, fossil fuel-drinking lawns that could be replaced if local produce, and by local I mean within a few hundred metres, if that food production was incentivised with a cash payment. You'd see Roundup sales plummet and food probably at glut levels, but excess can always be fed through animals and the soil fed by them. The author, Alexander Mace, then brings us into the 21st century. Quote, today we are fortunate enough to exist in an age where the application of new technologies to old world ideas can bring about exciting changes. With the emergence of sharing economies like Airbnb, Uber, Lyft and Favour, individuals could use the connective power of the internet paired with extra time, extra living spaces, or an extra vehicle to generate an income where one previously did not exist. The same is possible with extra, underutilised land and a family or individual with a passion for gardening and farming. The demand for local, small batch, high quality food sustainably grown and transported does exist. So why shouldn't these skilled individuals be able to sell their produce to the community around them? The answer is they can. End quote. Imagine an app for land usage and food production. The possibilities are amazing. The outcomes in health, sustainability and captured CO2 with increased soil carbon percentages are something to consider. If you are or know an app developer, this idea could change the world for the better. Alternatively, if you know of such an app already extant, let me know over on the Facebook page World Organic News, and I'll promote the tar out of it. To continue the good news, we have a post, Composting Massively Reduces Greenhouse Gas Emissions Compared to Landfill, from the blog The Tipping Point. Quote, at a recent meeting with local government mayors and CEOs, a claim was made that transporting organics by truck to a distant compost facility, in this case 150 k's away, would emit more greenhouse gases than landfilling it locally. Thinking that the carbon forcing factor of methane from landfill, 25 times CO2, would render that claim incorrect, I thought I should go back and check the maths. The answer was so startling I wrote this article. In short, a truck filled with 25 tonnes of food and garden organics, FOGO, can be driven 13,100 kilometres to a composting facility before it emits the same amount of greenhouse gases as that same truckload of food in a landfill with 45% gas capture, typical of whole-life gas capture. Or put another way, you could circumnavigate Australia, 14,500 kilometres, with FOGO compared to a standard landfill with gas capture. End quote. The methane, the forgotten greenhouse gas. You will note the 25 times more forcing than CO2. Methane does dissipate more quickly, but the punch it delivers is considerable. I assume people know about the methane in the tundra, but in case anyone doesn't, the permafrost in the northern tundra regions of Siberia, northern Canada, Scandinavia is laden with frozen methane. As these regions continue to warm and melt, exponentially larger amounts of methane are released each northern summer, in a self-reinforcing feedback loop of doom. We need to act, people, and we needed to act 30 years ago, but hey, better late than never. Sorry, I really did try to end with good news, but some weeks it is a challenge. And with that, I'll draw this episode to a conclusion. Remember, decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. As a podcast listener, you may be thinking of producing your own podcast, but you're not sure where to begin. Drop over to mrjohnmoore.com and pick up the free checklists I've written to help get you started. I'm also doing live presentations twice a week and putting them up as podcasts under the show name Pod Thoughts to help you through the process. Link in the show notes. If you'd like to see the live performances, and trust me, they're performances, go and like the page Podcast Like a Pro on Facebook. Details at the website mrjohnmoore.com. A transcript of this episode is available at worldorganicnews.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week.